Right then, let's crack on, shall we? And yes, just to say again, Krishnamurti's here with me again. It's becoming a bit of a routine, isn't it? So there's something going on there, and so I'm sure we'll find out at some point. But he's definitely here with me now, and anyone else, if he goes and visits anyone else, make sure you say so. Say if you feel him, and I'm sure we'll find out what the purpose is at some point. Right, and then let's start then, shall we? Right then. So today is lesson 15, intuition. So there are two lessons on intuition in this course, and this is the first one, obviously. And the first one is all about just explaining what we mean by the term intuition, how intuition works, what is the purpose of intuition, and a little bit about how we use intuition in network healers. And then the second lesson will be more focused on the journey of intuition and the applications in network healers. Now, when I mean the journey of intuition, what that means is how intuition changes over many, many incarnations, over the period of spiritual development or spiritual evolution, and especially as you're going through self-realization as well, because this course is for network healers and you guys are all going through self-realization, past the Kundalini phase into self-realization, and intuition really changes quite dramatically as you go through that process. So the second lesson will have a lot to do with that. Actually, before I even start about what intuition is, I should repeat that intuition. Why are we doing a lesson on intuition? Well, intuition is a massive part of network healers. In network healers, it's a mixture of self-healing for people and energy healing. And we use as much medical knowledge as we possibly can. So obviously it's complementary to allopathic conventional mainstream medicine. And we use as much scientific information that is available about certain conditions. But you always hit a brick wall because of where the current research is on a particular condition or a problem that somebody has. So after that, you need to start using intuition to find out, what's wrong with people, especially if it's in the energy body, especially if it's in one of the subtle energy frameworks. You have to use intuition, and there's all sorts of other things that we need to use intuition for in network healers. So that's why it's a big part of network healers, and that's why we've got a couple of lessons on it. So what is intuition? Because that word is very well known, of course. So we need to explain exactly what we mean when we're using these words. So you could say that intuition is a form of inner guidance of some kind. You're getting guidance from somewhere, and it's coming from inside of you, not outside of you. You could call it inner knowledge as well, because a guidance is a form of knowledge, you could say, but it's coming from inside. It's inner knowledge. And this is something that is not that well known to people sometimes. The fact that you can actually get knowledge from inside you instead of outside of you. And when I say outside of you, I'm talking about from other people, from learning, from education, from books, from media, and all that sort of stuff. There is a way of getting knowledge from inside of you as well. It's a different type of knowledge, mind you. And you could say it's a form of inner communication. So if you're getting guidance and knowledge and it's coming from somewhere, that means there's communication going on. But where is it coming from? That's the next question. And that's a very important question to ask. Where is it coming from, this communication? What are you communicating with? Where's this knowledge and guidance coming from? Because there are various sources of this. Because intuition, there are various types of intuition. So we're going to just talk about a few different types of intuition. Most of this lesson is going to be on one particular type, but we've got to acknowledge the other types just so we know what we're talking about. So you can get intuition from the lower mind. Lower mind intuition. It's coming from the lower mind subconscious. So, or when we say lower mind subconscious, we might as well say brain, because if you remember, the brain, the lower mind is an overlay to the material body. The lower mind is an energy framework which overlays the whole of the material body, or underlays it, if you like, whatever you like. But it's an integral part of the material body, you could say, the lower mind. And in the nervous system, there is an overlay to every single neuron in the brain. So the brain has neurons, and thinking patterns are those is when those neurons fire off with electrical activity. Well, the lower mind has an overlay to that. So for every brain neuron, there is a lower mind neuron. So in terms of thinking, when we're talking about thinking or subconscious stuff going on, the brain and the lower mind might as well be the same thing. So when I say lower mind in this context, you can apply that to the brain. But you can get intuition from the subconscious. You can ask the subconscious questions and you can get answers. And this is happening all the time as well. The lower mind subconscious is constantly analyzing and calculating without you knowing it. And then sometimes it throws up answers and stuff like that. So that's perfectly normal. And that's perfectly well known as well. Now, the thing is with the lower mind intuition is that you've got to be very careful with it, because it's only the only memories that it's trained on is this particular incarnation. And it's very influenced by all sorts of stuff, like emotions. Now, emotions do influence all types of intuition. We'll talk about that later on. But especially the lower mind can get influenced by emotional reactivity. Now, gut instinct is a good thing to talk about here. Now, I don't know that much about the details or the biology of how that works, but I'm pretty sure that there is some sort of link with the gut. And that's why that intuition has come out with that word in our language, gut instinct. And I think that gut instinct itself relates to lower mind subconscious intuition. But you've got to be careful with it. You shouldn't just trust that sort of intuition. You should always question it, analyze it. It can be useful, of course, and it can give you answers, because the lower mind is a powerful computer. It's a biological computer which makes calculations. So it can give you some answers, but you should always, use discernment, analysis, be very careful with it, use logic and rational analysis when it comes to the lower mind subconscious. So that's very important to say if we're talking about intuition or teaching intuition to others. Now, moving on, because most of the time when we talk about intuition, we're kind of talking about higher mind intuition. We have to acknowledge that there are other forms of intuition, and lower mind is a form of intuition. But in network healers especially, we're talking about intuition. And, when people talk about intuition out there, they may be lumping everything together, quite possibly. But here we're separating out. You can get lower mind intuition, higher mind intuition. There is a third type of intuition called akashic intuition. We have talked about that before. But mainly in this lesson, we're going to be talking about higher mind intuition. So what is higher mind intuition? Well, higher mind intuition, as you guys are already aware, because we have talked about this, of course, it's communication from your soul. And the higher mind is the thinking part of your soul. Now, quite often we use the words synonymously, soul, higher mind. You can use them interchangeably if you like, it's not really a problem. But really, technically speaking, you could say the higher mind is the thinking part of the soul, because the soul, if don't forget, is the higher mind plus energy body. But it's the higher mind that thinks. That's the part that reincarnates, the part of our system that reincarnates. So in this lesson, we're going to use these little diagrams here, that sort of whitish, translucent energy framework is the lower mind, and the bluish one is the higher mind. Now, how intelligent is the higher mind compared to the lower mind? Well, there is a vast gulf of intelligence between these two. And the reason is because the lower mind evolved as a survival mechanism, a survival tool for the material body. So its job really is to keep the material body alive. So it's very good at sort of worrying about things, analyzing things, trying to plan things, because it doesn't know the future. But that's what it has evolved for. And, quite some other tasks that it tries to do, it's not so good at. Like understanding the universe, for example, not quite so good at that. Now, the higher mind is phenomenally more powerful. I was once I was once asking when my higher mind first started talking to me. When I say me, when my higher mind first started talking to my lower mind, the lower mind was asking lots and lots of questions. And one of the questions was, just show me what's the difference? What's the difference between the lower mind and the higher mind? And at the time, I was outside, and I saw a little woodlouse creeping across the floor, and I became fixed on it, and my higher mind started telling the lower mind, "There's your difference." Basically, what it was telling me was the difference between the brain, the difference between the lower mind and the woodlice brain is the difference between lower mind and higher mind, basically. So, in other words, it's a bit of a silly example, but it was basically taking the mick. It was basically saying that's the difference that you've got. That's the difference that you're working with. I always remember that little example that my higher mind gave me. But anyway, this kind of exists in popular mythology as well. Have you heard of that phrase, oh, we only use 10% of our brains and we don't know what's going on with the other 90%? That's a popular thing to say. Well, I think there's a grain of truth behind that but really, it's not really the brain that we're talking about. It's the higher mind. The human higher mind is vastly powerful compared to what we realize in the lower mind, what we know about in the lower mind. And the functioning of the brain. There's so much more going on in the background in the higher mind. Now, when it comes to higher mind intuition, there's some important things that we need to understand. And we have talked about this before, so this is not new to you. But you can have a higher mind in a state of sleeping. Now, this is natural, and this is what happens through the journey of evolution, spiritual evolution. Because as a soul evolves through the animal species and evolves and develops, develops more and more levels of complexity and intelligence and development, that's all happening with a sleeping higher mind. The higher mind is just reincarnating naturally and automatically. There's no control process going on to it. The higher mind is still developing, and it's still logging all its memories and all that, but it's happening naturally. The higher mind's not thinking about it and controlling the process. And then when the soul gets into the human species, that still happens for a little while, and it's in the human species that the higher mind suddenly becomes awake or wakes up. Now, the thing is, when a higher mind is asleep, there is no higher mind intuition coming through to the lower mind because there's no planning going on. So there's no higher mind intuition at all. So in that case, the lower mind is pretty much on its own in that incarnation, in that life. So it's a bit like having a blindfold on, really. The lower mind is then subject to its own conditioning patterns. It's subject to its own genetics. It's subject to its own karma. What that means is that its decision-making process through that life, however that life goes for it, is just determined by its own conditioning patterns, i.e. its upbringing and its experiences in life and its genetics and then its karma that's dragged through from previous lives. All that is going into determining what happens in the life. So this is why sometimes mistakes happen, and quite often mistakes happen at this sort of stage. Now, we're going to talk more about this later on, but basically the difference between a real mistake and a false mistake is that a real mistake is somebody who is making a mistake because there's no life plan from the higher mind. Or there is a life plan, but the lower mind is deviating from it and making mistakes, going off the life plan because there's not enough guidance from the higher mind. So it's not difficult to come up with some examples of this. There's our human history is littered with people making real mistakes and causing all sorts of horrible atrocities and things like that. Those are real mistakes. But we should be compassionate to these people and realize that these are people, these are souls. The lower mind is making mistakes because there is no higher mind intuition coming in, because the soul, the the higher mind is asleep still. So a false mistake, which I'll talk about a bit more later on, but a false mistake is a mistake that somebody thinks they're making, but actually it's part of their life plan. It's actually planned. It's a planned mistake. It feels like a mistake at the time, but actually that was planned all along by the higher mind as part of the life plan, as a part of lesson learning, and also removing karma as well. We'll talk about that a bit later on. Now, at some point in the journey of evolution, spiritual evolution, that higher mind will wake up. Now, this can happen in various ways. It can happen on its own, but quite often these days, it's other higher minds that are helping that higher mind wake up, very often. And what happens then is that the higher mind actually starts to realize that it's reincarnating. So that's why we're using the term waking up. It just means that higher mind becomes aware that it's reincarnating, and that starts a whole domino effect of other things that happen. So once the soul realizes it's reincarnating, then it starts to realize its own karma as well, and realizes that the karma it's holding in the energy body is influencing its future. So it starts to be able to analyze its karma levels, and then it starts to get its past life memories and correspond its karma levels to past life experiences. So all that starts becoming a more conscious process. Now, I want to be careful, actually. I want to explain, when I use the word conscious process, I shouldn't really use that word because I don't want it to get confused with actual consciousness, because this is all still happening subconsciously. It's just that the high mind is starting to think about it and starting to plan. So this is when the higher mind will start to form soul families and make life plans, because as soon as it realizes that it's reincarnating, it starts to see other souls around it. And then it can join a soul family and start reincarnating in groups, in families. And then it learns the purpose. It learns why it exists, self-realization, the journey of life, the journey of the universe. It learns all that. And then from then on, it starts making life plans. It starts organizing its life plans, all with that purpose in mind. It starts learning off other higher minds. Now, this is when it starts to make life plans, this is when it starts to guide the lower mind on its life plan, because there's no point in making a life plan and then letting the lower mind go ahead and do whatever it was doing before. It needs to actually start guiding the lower mind. Otherwise, the lower mind's going to veer off completely, depending on whatever decisions it makes. So there needs to be a system in place where the higher mind can guide the lower mind, give it knowledge, give it guidance to stay on that life plan. So how long does this take? Well, it's a long period of time that this takes, the growing of intuition. And that's what we're talking about now. We're talking about intuition, the guiding aspect from the lower mind. That's what intuition really is. Now that grows over many, many incarnations. Now, that does change over the time, though. The time period of how long it takes changes over time. For example, in the past, it took a long time. So maybe hundreds and hundreds of incarnations, human incarnations, for that intuition to grow. But that is starting to change. And as we approach the global awakening, that time period is getting shorter and shorter and shorter. And as we go through the global awakening in this century and beyond, it's going to get even shorter, because the whole culture changes. And this becomes self-realization and spiritual evolution come to the forefront of human experience. And that really shortens the time frame in terms of how long it takes for intuition to grow. So that's what intuition is for. Now let's just quickly look a little bit at life plans and see how intuition impacts a life plan. Now, we talked about life plans a little bit in reincarnation lesson. First of all, let's talk about the calculating higher mind. Now, as I said before, the higher mind is a powerful, powerful calculating machine. And for a long period of time, it is calculating its higher mind. It's trying to calculate the future. Now, the higher mind can do that to a very very high level because its computing power is so great. If you think of every decision that's made in a life and all the different consequences of each decision, that's a huge amount of planning. Now, the higher mind can do that. It can calculate all those eventualities in a life plan. So it does that as part of a life plan to start with. And that means that we can actually classify the higher mind as a biological supercomputer. It really is a powerful supercomputer. You could call it, if you wanted to be, you could call it a super quantum computer if you wanted, but I'm going to refrain from putting that in the notes just because that annoys the physicists. But generally speaking, you could say that it's a quantum computer, although it doesn't work in the same manner that a modern quantum computer does. But quantum, as in it's far smaller. It fits into a far smaller space. The amount of say, if you can imagine the neurons in the brain, how small they are. They're quite small, but they're still made of matter. They're still made of molecules. But each connection, each neuron is a connection to each other. So it forms a network of neurons. But if you think about the higher mind thinking part of the higher mind, the cognition circuits, let's call it, that fits into such a smaller space because it's smaller, each connection is smaller even than an electron. So the amount of computing power in the network that can fit into the same space is phenomenally larger. So we can call it a biological supercomputer. Now, it's calculating the life plans, isn't it, at the moment, through the journey of evolution, spiritual evolution. It starts calculating these life plans. Now, at some point, it starts to download akashic information. Now, akashic information is non-physical information coming from the source. Now, this happens when the higher mind's Kundalini system has been installed, or some of it. All you need is the framework before the Kundalini starts growing. All you need is the framework to be put in. And then akashic download can start to be downloaded in very, very small amounts, mind you, at the start. Just dribs and drabs of akashic download. Now, what does akashic download mean? Well, that's downloading the future, for example. So when you're making a life plan, if the high mind can download bits and pieces of the future, it can start integrating that into its life plan, because that's what's actually going to happen, not necessarily what it's calculating might happen. So through the journey of spiritual evolution, intuition changes. We're going to talk more about this in lesson 2. But intuition changes over the journey of spiritual evolution because as the soul evolves, more and more akashic download happens and less calculating the life plan happens. So that's what gradually happens, and we'll talk more about that in lesson 2. Now let's look at a life plan and see how intuition can help the life plan, or help the lower mind on its life plan. So this is an example of a life plan with no, well, actually, this is an example of a life. There's no life plan. So this is a sleeping higher mind. Now imagine you start on the left and you finish on the right. So you've got to get through this maze of decisions through the life. Now each one of those little white points is a decision to make. And there's loads of pathways through that particular life. There's all sorts of different ways that lower mind could get from start to finish. Now, when the higher mind starts to make a life plan, it charts a course through that life. So this is an organized life plan. So we're starting on the left, finishing on the right. And this is the actual route that the higher mind wants to take through that life. Now, how does it get the lower mind to take that route? So imagine that decision there, the arrow is pointing to. Imagine that's one of the first decisions to make, isn't it? So you can either turn left or you can turn right there. And obviously the intuition has to kick in at that point and make the lower mind turn left. Otherwise, if it turns right, it's going to go down another path. And the next decision, if you carry on up, then it's got to turn right, hasn't it, to keep on the path. If it If it carries on going there, it's going to take that red route, which you can still get to the end of the life with that particular route. If it carries on in that red path, you still can get to the end of the life. It's just not the life that the higher mind had planned. And there may have been lots of things that the higher mind had planned, lots of lesson learning that the higher mind had planned. Maybe it had planned to meet up with another higher mind and have a life with that higher mind. And then the lower mind went off the rails and went off did a completely different life, and it didn't learn the lessons that the higher mind wanted it to learn. Or maybe in the first decision there, it went right instead of left, and then it got to a dead end, and that was the end of the life. That can happen. Or maybe it took that route instead, and it got halfway through the life, but there was still a dead end. So basically, those routes are routes that the higher mind doesn't want to take. So the higher mind needs to keep that lower mind on that life plan. So how does it do that? Through intuition, of course, but how specifically? Let's go into that. So let's talk about growing intuition and where intuition actually, the pathways that intuition runs from higher mind to lower. So these pathways grow over time, and the purpose is to guide the lower mind on the life plan. But it takes many incarnations to grow. So these pathways we're going to go through, it starts off with very small amounts of intuition that can go through, and it just grows and grows and grows over many incarnations until it becomes very strong. So when a higher mind starts sending intuition through, they may have a life plan, but the intuition might be quite weak, so the lower mind keeps veering off and making real mistakes. But as spiritual evolution develops, then that intuition gets stronger and stronger and stronger. And if you can imagine a very well-developed soul, one that's ready for self-realization, for example, then that lower mind will be on the higher mind life plan to 99.99999%, basically. So there's various pathways that the higher mind can communicate with the lower mind through. First one to talk about is the nervous system. So the higher mind can access the lower mind's nervous system. Now, many of you have done dowsing before. I know some of you do it a lot. Dowsing is an example of higher mind to lower mind communication. So if you're not aware what dowsing is when you use a pendulum and you hold it in your hand and you start asking questions, and you get the answer through what direction the pendulum is swinging. And quite often it's a yes or a no, or a no answer. So that's a very popular thing that happens already. And that is actually going through the nervous system. So what's happening is that the higher mind is actually sending signals through the nervous system, controlling the muscles and the nerves in the arm and the fingers to a very, very fine level where you're of it consciously, but it's affecting the answer, so it affects what direction the pendulum swings. Now, another method is the head nodding and shaking. I don't know if any of you guys have noticed this, but you can do it. You can do the pendulum thing with your head quite often, and sometimes this happens naturally. You ask yourself a question and you get a nod or a shake. That can happen quite a lot. Again, that's just the nervous system. And to be honest with you, any movement in the body can be used. You know, I've spoken to people who do funny little things with their fingers. They get an answer in that way, or it can actually affect any of your nervous system. So you can get those kind of answers through any part of the nervous system. Now, the actual pathways that is going through is through all the major chakras. It does actually go through the chakras, and the reason is because chakras are a gluing point between bodies, between energy frameworks, between the higher mind and the lower mind. The chakras, you could say, are communication points between the higher mind and lower mind. So pathways will run through them. Now, the nervous system goes through all the chakras, but there are specific types of intuition which run through each chakra separately. And we're talking about the 7 major chakras on the spinal column here. So let's run through each one of these and show how the higher mind can guide the lower mind. Because a minute ago when I was talking about the nervous system, that's actually part of using intuition with conscious intent. Most of the times, these chakra pathways are used completely unconsciously. The higher mind can just guide the lower mind without the lower mind knowing it's being guided. And that's what's going on in many people today. They're not aware they're being guided. It's just their inner guidance. And that is very often coming from their higher mind. So let's start that already. So let's start with the crown chakra. So the pathway, the type of intuition that goes through the crown chakra is knowing. Now, that is a sensation, isn't it? Knowing. It's a feeling. Now, you can have a knowing about something that's sometimes not even attached to information or knowledge, which is a bit of a strange sensation. It's just a feeling of knowing. But if you attach knowing to something else, then you're really sure of something, aren't you? So that's a good way of guiding the lower mind, by sending in a feeling of knowing something. But it's really much more, just having a feeling of knowing on its own is not that useful as a guidance system. It needs something else, doesn't it? And what it needs is information. Now, information goes through the brow chakra. So information on its own is useless because it needs to be known. And information that is known is knowledge. So knowing plus information is a very powerful guidance system already. So what do we mean by information? Well, that comes through the brow chakra. Well, here we're talking about thought forms, mainly. So we're talking about things like images, visions, words, language. And if your higher mind talks to your lower mind, you can actually have a conversation. It's like an inner voice that can actually talk to the lower mind. So the next one is the throat chakra, and that is focus. So to do anything successfully, people need to have a certain amount of focus on something. And the higher mind can actually activate that focus in the lower mind. And interestingly, when people have a very strong blockage in the throat chakra, they tend to be unfocused as well, or often it goes with a lack of focus. Or if you unblock the throat chakra, you can actually develop more focus in people. So that proves that also that blockages do hinder intuition as well. Next one is the heart chakra, and that is unsurprisingly love. The higher mind can activate the emotion of love, and that's very useful in many situations, isn't it? Especially if there is a person that the higher mind has organized to meet up with and maybe get together with, of course. Activating love is very important then, isn't it? So it's another good form of guidance. And the solar plexus chakra, that's pleasure. And that's not difficult to see why that's a good form of guidance, because the pleasure system is a reward system. That's how that's evolved anyway. So if the higher mind can activate pleasure, it can actually guide the lower mind very successfully in many things, because the lower mind evolved as a pleasure-seeking machine, because pleasurable things keep the body alive rather than the opposite. Painful things tend to be bad for the material body. So that's a very easy form of guidance for the high mind to tweak in certain situations. The next one is the sacral chakra, and that is enthusiasm. So again, enthusiasm is needed for various things in life. For example, if the higher mind wants to direct the lower mind into a particular profession, it's going to need enthusiasm and a bit of pleasure as well, but enthusiasm for that particular profession. And a good example here would be once the higher mind realizes that karma yoga burns negative karma off without feeling emotional reactions, then it's going to direct that lower mind into certain professions that encourage karma yoga. And if you remember, karma yoga is the yoga of selfless action. So, for example, it might point that lower mind into the direction of the altruistic professions, helping others, basically. And it needs to tweak or activate the enthusiasm for that particular thing. So it's another guidance. And the last one, the root chakra, that's joy. And joy, you could say, is a short form of happiness. Joy over the long term, you could say, is happiness. And that's very important to activate in certain situations. If the higher mind wants the lower mind to be happy in a particular place or situation, then it activates joy. And and the lower mind processes happiness. So those are the major pathways of intuition, how the higher mind guides the lower mind in its life plan. So again, just to remind you about the real mistakes versus the false mistakes. Now we've seen how what intuition is, how life plans are sort of formulated, and how intuition guides the lower mind on a life plan. Now you can see really how there can be real mistakes versus false mistakes. You know, a real mistake is when the lower mind veers off the life plan and starts just making mistakes. And what we mean by that is that it might get to the end of that life and not have learnt or achieved what the higher mind wanted to achieve. And by the way, when we use the word achieve, we're not talking about the usual definitions of achievement. We're talking about whatever the higher mind needed to achieve in that life. And that could have been burning off a certain amount of karma. That could have been learning certain emotional lessons. It could have been all sorts of different things. And false mistakes. You can now maybe see how certain things are planned as part of a life plan, which can be painful. So some life lessons are painful. Some emotional lessons are painful. Burning karma is painful because you're feeling emotional reactions. That's how karma is most of the time burnt. That is part of a life plan. So false mistakes, for example, somebody may have made a perceived mistake. They may have wronged somebody else, or they may have done something they're not happy with, done something they're ashamed of or guilty about. But that they feel like that's a mistake, but actually that could have been part of their life plan because they needed to do it to learn lessons or to burn karma. So that's a false mistake. It's a mistake that you would normally call a mistake that's actually part of your life. Are you feeling love, by the way? Because that's what I've noticed Krishnamurti does quite a lot. When Krishnamurti comes to visit sometimes, it's happened multiple times in the past, when he's come to visit us, quite often he will activate love, or he will send a transmission. He will send a transmission of love to you. So if you're feeling love, then that means that he's doing that right now in the room. Send it right back. Yeah, yeah, nice. And Sally, were you picking up on Sharon's healing there, or was he giving healing to you for something as well? Can't hear you. Can't hear you. Oh, right. Okay. 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 Well, next time, ask him. What are you doing? No, sometimes you don't get an answer. Yeah. Yeah. All right. Okay. Let's crack on then. So let's talk about um, something which comes up quite often, and that is the idea of guides. And this is quite prevalent in the spiritualist tradition, or the spiritualist religion, or spiritual philosophy, whatever you want to call it. And the reason why I'm bringing it up is that there's lots of different things that come up, or language and or concepts that come up. So I thought maybe we'll just run through a few of these concepts just to maybe give some clarity on what some of these things mean, and some of maybe the real meaning behind some of them. So first of all, avatars. Now, all of this does relate to intuition, by the way, because a lot of these things sometimes are mistaken, or intuition can be mistaken for some of these things sometimes. Now, avatars. Now, Krishnamurti just turned up, didn't he? That is a perfect example, and that was very timely, a timely appearance. That's an example of an avatar, or what we would call an avatar. An avatar is somebody who has finished their reincarnation journey, become self-realized, and now exist in the astral dimensions, going about the astral dimensions, doing their job, doing their work. They're fully self-realized, so they've got their higher purpose, and all their actions is fully controlled by the source through their ninth chakra. So that's an avatar, and there are various human avatars out there in the astral. And maybe that is why Krishnamurti actually has been visiting us lately, because maybe they are going to, the human avatars are going to start introducing themselves to the group. So you can get avatars. Now, avatars can be guides. So the concept of guides does exist, because there are certainly avatars out there, and they do offer guidance to people all the time. How about family members? So Family members can also act as guides sometimes. So family members, what we're talking about here is family members that have passed away, who are in between incarnations, or even people who have been in past incarnations can help, they can go around helping other people. Now, the reason why all this relates to intuition is that sometimes people can get intuitive feelings or thoughts or guidance, and it can be coming from these different concepts, these different types of beings, or it can be their own intuition sometimes. So this has to be deciphered. Angels is a word which is used quite a lot, and of course angels really is probably used strongest in the religions, but it's used in other philosophies as well, and New Age spirituality and stuff like that. Now, angels, to be honest, I think that concept of angels really comes from the concept of avatars. Really, that's what an angel is, as far as we're concerned. It is actually a person that has gone through their reincarnation, become self-realized, and exists in the astral dimensions. And there's more. They're not just human either. I'll talk about that in just a second. Spirit animals. So spirit animals is a thing, and people quite often see spirit animals in various spiritual traditions. Now, I think in many cases, or most cases, I would say that this is actually somebody's higher mind intuition, because people's higher mind can communicate with them in various different formats. And seeing spirit animals and getting guidance from spirit animals, more often than not, is somebody's own higher mind talking to them in that form. Ascended masters, that's another phrase that is used sometimes, especially in New Age spirituality. So this is kind of the same concept as the avatars, really. It's spiritually developed people who finished reincarnating, self-realized, and they exist in the astral dimensions doing their work. Aliens, I don't want to get sidetracked too much with the whole aliens discussion. However, just to say that a lot of people say that they talk to aliens in the astral, and we want to say here that there are actually avatars which are non-human, and we wouldn't generally use the word aliens. We're just using it there because it's a popular word, but we would call them celestial beings. Now, avatars, of course, self-realization exists on lots and lots of different planets in the universe. And so you can have self-realized beings in the astral dimensions that are not humans. And we do, and we have plenty of them. So avatars can be human or they can be non-human. Assigned life guide. Now, this is a concept in mostly spiritualism, I think, where people say that they are assigned a life guide at the start of an incarnation, and then they leave at the end of the incarnation. And that assigned life guide talks to them through that life, guides them, gives them guidance through that life. Well, here I would say that most of the time this is the higher mind. This is somebody's own higher mind talking to them. I think that this concept comes from the higher mind, because the higher mind is there at the start of your life. It's there through your life, but it doesn't go away. It is part of your mind. It's part of your system. It is part of you. Ancestors is another word that comes up quite a lot in quite a lot of indigenous ancient cultures and things like that. And it's still quite popular, isn't it, that people talk to their ancestors. I think this could be probably a mixture of things, and a mixture of intuition. Quite a lot of the times it's probably intuition, or sometimes they're talking to a spirit entity that is around, that spirit entity might well have been in their past. It might be in their, somebody who's in their family that's passed away, or it could even be somebody who has been in some of their past incarnations. Past incarnations. So I have seen people who see some of their own past incarnations and call them a guide. But actually it's their own higher mind appearing to them as one of their own past incarnations. I've seen that on a number of occasions. So again, that's another form of intuition, that is. Spirit. So I'm just raising that just to clarify exactly what some people mean when they use the word spirit, because a lot of people use the word spirit, talking to spirit, getting messages from spirit. I think the thing is with the word spirit, some people use it in different ways. So some people use the word spirit as another word for universal consciousness or source or God or something like that. Other people use the word spirit and they mean a spirit entity, an actual entity which is in the astral dimensions. And then other people use the word spirit when they're talking about subtle energy, as in magnetic energy, subtle energy. So there's a few different meanings of that word. They is another interesting word that people use. They are talking to me. They are controlling things. They are offering me advice in my life. This is a popular thing to say. I think quite often when people say that it's usually their higher mind that's actually giving them that guidance, that intuition. Quite often, but not always. There can be some avatars, or there can be family members that are influencing that as well. And astral forms. Now this is interesting because that's come up just lately, hasn't it? So you can actually see stuff in the astral, and an astral form is not something which is conscious. It's not an actual being. It's just a figment of or it's a projection from ourselves, basically. So it is technically created by the higher mind, but I wouldn't call it a type of intuition because they don't generally give you any information or knowledge. It's more sort of a metaphorical form or figment of your own mind in the astral. So you can get intuition in dreams as well. Our dreams are full of all sorts of things, aren't they? Oh, it's 11 o'clock. I've been reminded. I didn't need Veronica to remind me today. So before we talk about intuition and dreams, let's have a little break. See you in a couple of minutes. So intuition and dreams. Now the thing is about dreams is that there is so much stuff in dreams. It's very difficult to decipher any intuition that comes through dreams, really. So let's just have a quick look in terms of what things you can get in dreams, which makes it so difficult to really use dreams for intuition. First of all is metaphors. It's very well known that dreams are constructed using metaphors quite often. So that adds a layer of complexity to it. And it's very well known also that a lot of our own psychology comes out in dreams. That's what a lot of dreams are constructed with, the psychology of the lower mind subconscious. And that is based on our memories. So that's why a lot of memories come up in dreams, and actually the brain is actually sorting through memories as we're dreaming as well. So that's a big part of it. So lower mind memories, as in this incarnation memories, are littered throughout our dreams. Now, there's also astral experiences in dreams. So we're actually uploading and downloading stuff from the astral dimensions all the time. So we do get quite a lot of actual astral experiences in dreams. So that's something else that is chucked into the mix. On top of that, you've got past life memories sometimes. These can actually come through dreams. So that's something additional to consider. And there's a lot of junk in dreams as well, because the brain is sorting through all its memories, all experiences it's had, and putting everything in the right place. And it creates stories as part of that memory sorting. So you could say there's a lot of junk in there to sort through as well. And finally, yes, you can get higher mind messages in dreams as well. So intuition can come through into dreams. But if you take account of all this other stuff that's going on, it's really difficult to make any sense of sometimes. So it's not really the best way of getting intuition through. Although, funnily enough, it is a very popular way, isn't it? Dream interpretation has been around for thousands of years. So you could almost say it's one of the most popular forms of getting guidance. But it's very difficult to decipher. So let's talk about using intuition with conscious intent specifically now. So we've talked about various types of intuition. Most of the time we've been talking about subconscious intuition. We've mentioned it. We've mentioned conscious intent a few times, but most of the time we've been talking about guidance from the higher mind to lower mind in a sort of unconscious way that the lower mind's not really aware of it. But you can use intuition with conscious intent. And this is what a lot of people are doing already. The whole industry is based around this. And this is what we use in network healers as well, using our intuition with conscious intent. Now, before I talk about that, we should talk about the industry, the big industry of intuition. That's something that we should be careful of sometimes. And the reason why is this little bugger here. So this is our little friend, the ego, or the egoic identity. So unfortunately, this little chap gets involved in so many areas of life. Now, let me just remind you how the egoic identity functions. It is an identity process. So when we say ego, it is like a little gremlin-y, monstery thing, but really it's just a psychological structure in the mind. And it's how the identity of the lower mind gets formed. And it does that through forming beliefs about oneself. That's what the ego, the egoic identity, how it's constructed. Its belief systems, it's what it believes mainly about itself. Now, this can actually form what we call a spiritual ego. Now, by the way, just as an aside here, you guys are all past the Kundalini phase of self-realization. So at the end of the Kundalini phase, the egoic structure in the lower mind breaks and it's no longer creating an ego. So once you go past that phase, I mean, you can completely forget about the ego in oneself. That doesn't happen anymore. However, the functioning ego can actually become a spiritual ego. Now, what that means is that the identity has built, or the ego has built an identity around being a spiritual person. Now, you can see this out there quite a lot sometimes when people are trying to act a certain way, when people are trying to act spiritual. That is the identity it's made an identity of being spiritual. You know, the ego is a sneaky little bugger. You've got to be careful. You try and get rid of it and then it'll come back in another way. And if you're trying to be spiritual, the ego can actually sometimes come back as that spiritual identity. Now, another area that it can flourish is when we use this word, psychic. Now, I don't want to generalize completely and tar everyone with the same brush, because absolutely it's not completely everybody. And there's lots of genuine people out there. However, the whole industry of being psychic is notorious for having a lot of ego in it. And there's a lot of charlatans out there, and there's a lot of people preying on other people. So it's a bit of a minefield out there, that whole sector. There are some genuine people out there who are generally wanting to help other people, though. So that doesn't mean everybody. And, there's nothing wrong with having a psychic and having people go to a psychic, and lots of people love it, going to a psychic and getting readings and getting guidance and predictions and things like that. Nothing wrong with it. It's just that in its unregulated form, that sector tends to encourage a lot of ego. So that's something to be aware of when we are using intuition with conscious intent. And this is when the identity will start saying that it has gifts. And this is a common phrase. This is when the identity sees itself as different from somebody else. And especially when psychics will say that other people can't do this, I've got a gift. Because intuition is a human thing. Everybody can do intuition. Some people may be more practiced in it than others, or whatever. But really, essentially, it's a human thing. So personally, we don't really like the word gift, but that's something to be aware of. That whole the ego thing with the word psychic, which is why we try not to use the word psychic, to be honest. So we're back to now using intuition with conscious intent. Now, there's a few things to be aware of when we're using intuition with conscious intent, and that is the language of intuition. We've got to understand what language it's talking, because there's a few pitfalls to be aware of when we are interpreting our intuition. To know, to start with, that it's coming to us in a different language. Even if it's using plain words like the English language in your thoughts, that's not what we mean. The method of information is a different language. So we've got to be aware of that. And this is the language. And don't worry about this diagram too much for the moment. This is called the Universal Trinity. We're going to have a whole lesson on the Universal Trinity a bit later on because it's a very important concept. It's how the universe actually works. But it also forms a language. And this language is used when communicating from higher mind to lower mind. It's also used in the astral dimensions as well. So this applies similarly to when a medium communicates with a spirit entity. It's this same language, so the same sort of pitfalls apply. Now, the problem is that it's a metaphorical language. It's full of metaphors, and we call them twists. Now, we've talked about this already a little bit, metaphorical twists in intuition. But imagine that diagram, which is a language, all twisted up. And this is what you see on this slide. And those twists correspond to these metaphors in the language that you have to interpret. So it's very important to interpret it correctly. So let's talk about interpreting intuition quickly. Now, what is a metaphor? A metaphor is all about meaning, isn't it? A metaphor is something, a word or a concept which applies to another concept and it's linked with meaning. That means that. That's what a metaphor is. So when you receive a bit of intuition, the first thing you want to say to yourself is, where's the twist? Where is the metaphor? Because quite often, well, there's always going to be some sort of metaphor, and your mind interprets it in a particular fashion. Think of it as a scale of meaning like this. On one end, you've got the correct meaning, and on the other end, you've got the anti-meaning. In other words, the incorrect interpretation. So you can interpret that intuition correctly or incorrectly, basically. And you can actually interpret that intuition anywhere along that particular scale of meaning. I'll give you an example here as well, a very simple example, which is a very common example. So very often the metaphor of a house is used. This is often in dreams, but often in other types of intuition as well. You get something about a house. Let's say, for example, you get an intuition that you need to, and this is, taking things down really simply. You get an intuition that you need to clean out your house. And so that's your intuition. And you get it in a dream as well. You get a dream where you're cleaning, you're going around your house, cleaning your house. So basically, the first thing you want to say is, where is the twist? Where's the metaphor? And then you want to extrapolate that scale of meaning. And I'm using this metaphor because it's a very common one. Most of the time when people get intuition of a house, it means their mind. That is a metaphor for one's mind or one's self. So if you interpret it literally, you're going to go and start cleaning your house, and your house might be perfectly clean. That's interpreting the intuition incorrectly. That's interpreting the anti-meaning. The other end of the scale is the correct meaning, and the correct meaning is the mind. And the intuition might have been meant something along the lines of, you need to delve within your psychology and root out all the afflictions of the mind and clean up the mind, clean up the subconscious mind. That would be the interpreting the intuition, interpreting the metaphor, and getting to the real meaning of it. So that's just a very quick and easy example, and that can be applied to all intuitions, really, if you look hard enough. So we do have to always be aware of that. Now, it doesn't always happen that way, but and sometimes you interpret it straight away with the correct meaning. If you're trying to see a chakra blockage, for example, and you see it in the sacral chakra, it's quite, it's difficult to put a metaphor onto that, for example. So it doesn't necessarily apply to absolutely everything, but it's a general guide when you're getting some intuition or some guidance. Now, one thing to be very careful of, which I mentioned before, was emotion. Be very careful. If you are getting an intuition through, and it's got any emotion attached to it when you think of that intuition, when you're given it, then be very careful. There's going to be a twist. There is going to be a metaphorical twist. It's not going to be exactly what you think, most likely. Or not, because the emotion pushes you into a certain direction. It pushes you into interpreting the intuition wrongly very often. So it's just something to be very careful of. And that applies to all intuitions, all types of intuition, low mind, high mind. So when you use your intuition with conscious intent, the easiest way to do it is very simple. You ask a question and you get an answer. And the way you do that, and we've got an assignment for this lesson coming, and the assignment is intuition exercises. So you're going to give this a go. So this is the method we're asking you to use, and there's lots of different methods to get intuition out, which I'll go through in a second. Or there's lots of different ways that the high mind can answer. But basically what you want to do here is that you want to ask the question in your mind. You want to spend a couple of minutes just asking the question. And then, sorry, even just seconds actually, not necessarily minutes, quite a few seconds just asking the question in your mind. And then you want to clear your mind. You want to clear your mind completely of anything. Just for a few seconds, 5 seconds will do, something like that, and wait for the answer. You don't have to try and get the answer. You just clear your mind and you just wait to see what happens. And that answer can come in many different formats. So let's just go through some of these formats that it can come through. So you can get tingles. This is a very popular thing, isn't it? Getting tingles in a particular part of the body or all over body tingles sometimes when it's a really strong intuition. That's going through the nervous system, isn't it? Physical feelings, as we talked about at the start. If we're talking about the nervous system, it can be anything really. So you can get all sorts of physical feelings that come as an answer. And you just got to be aware. You just got to clear your mind and wait and see what is going to come up. So physical feelings can come up. Involuntary movements, as we talked about before as well, nervous system stuff, any sort of involuntary movements that can come through. The chakra pathways, of course, what we learned earlier in this lesson. It can come through the chakra pathways. So that means it can come through knowings, a feeling of knowing. It can come in words, that's information, and through the brow chakra. Images and visions, this is a very common form. The words and images and visions are probably the most common form that you get. You can get actual language coming through words, or maybe just you'll see something and you'll have to decipher what that image was. In fact, that's very common, seeing a vision and then having to spend a bit of time deciphering what it means. That's very, very common. And because we're talking about chakra pathways, there's focus as well. Maybe it makes you want to focus in a particular direction or focus on something. Love, feelings of pleasure, feelings of enthusiasm. I'm just listing all the chakra pathways because it can come through them. This is not very common, though, to ask a question and then get an enthusiasm about something, but it can happen. Joy. And it can come through hearing and taste as well. So that is a thing, but less common. So the most common that you're going to get when you ask yourself a question is going to be tingles, maybe physical feelings, knowings, words, images, and visions. Those are probably going to be the most common that you're going to get, especially with this particular exercise that we're going to do. Okay, any questions so far? Right. About what, sorry? About your ear? Yeah, so there's a couple of things that can be. First of all, just to answer your question there, in any of you guys, it's not going to be lower mind anymore. So that actually changes as you go through the Kundalini phase. At the end of the Kundalini phase, the high mind takes complete control over everything. The ego disappears. The low mind subconscious is still there, of course, and with all the conditioning patterns, but you won't be getting any lower mind intuition. So that's the first thing. So it will be higher mind. Well, there's a couple of things that it could be when it comes through, especially when there's tinnitus going on, because tinnitus can be a Kundalini awakening symptom, by the way. So that they can be a link to that. But in your case, if you're getting messages through at that time, tinnitus can also happen when you're communicating with a being of some kind, a spirit entity. So the two choices you've got there is either it's high mind intuition, or you're actually communicating with an avatar or someone that is close to you. And you can only know that through intuition. You've got to ask yourself who or what you are communicating with, so that you before you can really know. Yeah, I guess if it's not common to get this after asking a question, but sometimes if you ask a question, and it might not necessarily come immediately when you clear your mind, but sometimes it makes your high mind makes you move your head and focus on something, and that's your answer. And depends where you are, what you're doing, what's on your screen, what's going on around you, what people are around. I mean, it depends what the question is. But yeah, you can actually be made to focus on something. Like I remember when my high mind first started talking to me, I would ask questions sometimes, and it would make my eyes move to a certain point in the screen and focus on a particular word, and that was my answer. Very strange. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, in the second lesson, we'll go into more about the journey of intuition, how it starts really ramping up as you're going through this process, as you're going through self-realization. It really starts kicking off. So well, go on. Yeah, I mean, you do go through a phase actually, though, in Kundalini and self-realization where the energy senses really ramp up uncontrollably sometimes, and sometimes it can be really off-putting. Sometimes even when you go outside, for example, go out to the supermarket or something, you can be accosted by all sorts, and you're feeling other people's energies and all sorts. It really can be quite disturbing. But that is a phase through as you go through self-realization, and after that, it kind of becomes more selective. Your higher mind just sort of calms it down a little bit, and then you get to choose who you actually interact with. Yeah, that's a very good point. Yeah, that can definitely happen. So yeah, if you're going through this exercise and you don't get an answer, that's a good way of handling it. Maybe coming back to it later. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Excellent. All right then. So let's get on with the assignment now. Then, so the assignment for this week is intuition exercises. And there's going to be 5 different types of intuition exercise. And basically, we've designed this specifically. They're very nice and easy types, but they're designed because we use intuition with network healers. So they're kind of based around network healers. But you can use intuition for any purpose. So the first exercise is literally the most simple, the question and the answer. So you just need to decide what question you're going to ask, and you wait for your answer. As I said before, you just ask the question over and over and over in your mind, and then clear your mind completely and sit and see what answer actually comes up. So any answer might come up in that time, or nothing at all. No answer is still a result, by the way, because quite often when you ask a question, if you don't get an answer, that is often an answer. Now, the reason why that is because sometimes you're not ready to get that answer. You're not allowed that answer. That can happen. And sometimes you're not asking the right question either. So you can phrase a question in a certain way and you don't get an answer. And then you go back and you rephrase it in another way, and then you get an answer. Sometimes it can be that you're not being specific enough. Because, sorry, go on. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. The yes/no answer thing is definitely a way forward. Yeah, yeah, you can do that if you want. Yeah, no problem at all. But so I was just talking about the detail in the question as well. Sometimes when you ask a question and you don't get an answer, you might not be quite asking the right question, or maybe the answer is not as simple as what you're asking, for example, especially with the yes/no answer thing. Sometimes you ask a question and actually the reality is that it's not a yes or no answer. So then you've got to be more specific and ask a more specific question that you might get a yes or no to. So yeah, so you've got to play around with this a little bit, try it and try it again with different types of questions. And also you've got to start to learn what questions you're going to get answered and what questions you're not going to get answered. Now, as you're going through the self-realization process, especially when you're in the negative cycle of the self-realization process, you're quite often not going to get answers about your own process, because your whole process is based around confusion and triggering. So quite often it doesn't give you answers about yourself, but you ask it about somebody else's process, and quite often it will give you the answer. Or if you're asking it questions about somebody else's health, or somebody else's spiritual evolution, or for the benefit of somebody else, it generally gives you the answer. Another example is if you ask it questions about the future, quite often you're not going to get an answer, or quite often you get silly answers. Another thing to be aware of is that it can give you nonsense sometimes, and that's okay. That's not a problem. It's doing it on purpose. So you just got to trust it that it knows what it's doing. So if you ask it a question, or what's going to happen to me, or when am I going to die, or what's going to happen to me next year, or what's the lottery numbers, or something like that, it's not going to give you an answer, or it's going to, at best, it's not going to give you an answer. At worst, it's going to give you some nonsense. So that can happen as well. So this is just a case of learning to use the connection, really. So that's the first one, question answer. Just experiment with the question and answer. So you ask the question in your mind, and you clear your mind and wait for an answer, and then you can try it again. Or, as Valerie says, yes, if you're not getting an answer, wait a bit and see what comes up later on. The answer might come as something that you're not expecting a bit later on. The next one is similar, but a medical question. So ask yourself a question, but something medical. Now, it's a bit tricky if it's yourself. You try it on yourself just for the exercise and see what answers you get. But it's really much better if you've got someone around you that's got some sort of medical issue, or someone you know has got some sort of medical issue. Most people know someone with some sort of issue. So basically just think of a question that you wouldn't normally know the answer to, and see if you can actually get the answer from your higher mind. Now, of course, we use this a lot in Network Healers, don't we? This is one of the biggest uses of intuition in Network Healers. And also experiment with the level of detail in the question as well. Try really general ones about that subject, and then try something really specific. See if it makes any difference in the intuition. Okay, the next one is chakras. This is another one that we use a lot in Network Healers. Trying to diagnose people's chakras, i.e. their chakra blockages. Because chakra blockages are a massive part of self-healing. They're also a massive part of energy healing as well. Because, we want to teach people to unblock their own chakras, but in energy healing, we also try and help people unblock them through energy healing, through sending energy healing. So knowing which chakras are blocked is a very important part of Network Healers. So try this yourself. This is an easy one to try, because there's, just choose someone in your life somewhere and try and visualize them in front of you. Try and visualize their chakra system in front of you, and see if you can see where the blockages are and where the clear chakras are. Now, there's other ways of seeing it, by the way. So you don't have to visualize. You can just ask the question, see if you get any sort of answer at all, or sometimes you just know. Sometimes it just appears. Oh, I know it's the sacral. Something like that. But try the visual one as well to see if it gives you a visual representation. The next one is karma. Again, very important to understand people's karma in Network Healers, isn't it? Because karma is the source of people's suffering. Karma is the source of emotional reactions, and quite often is linked to what happens in people's lives. So understanding people's karma is very important. So here you can do it in a number of ways, but you want to try and understand what karma and what negative karmas that person has. So here we're talking about linking the karma to emotions, and linking those emotions to a context, if you're lucky. But linking it to an emotion is a very important start. So, for example, is that person's negative emotions dominated by fear or anxiety? Or is it dominated by hatred? or anger or something like that. So it's first of all linking it to what emotion it is. And then if you can go even further, try and find out which chakra it's associated with in terms of energy psychology. For example, if it's a fear of death, a strong fear of death, an overwhelming fear of death, the context is death, the emotion is fear, but the chakra is the root chakra, because that's safety, security, and survival. So each karma will be linked to a particular emotion chakra. So you can get all this information through intuition. And the last one is Kundalini. Very important to try and assess where people's Kundalini growth is, because it helps you as a healer, it helps you help that person if you know where their Kundalini growth is. Is that person ready for a Kundalini awakening in this lifetime? Or is it grown up to the heart level, for example? Or is it grown up to the sacral level? Or is there no Kundalini system started to grow yet and it's a sleeping higher mind versus an awake higher mind? Very important to know, because you from there you'll determine whether there's a life plan in place or whether there's no life plan in place. And that changes dramatically how you go about trying to help that person. Sometimes people, the higher mind won't accept healing because it's part of the life plan to go through that experience. So that can happen. So again, just ask yourself the question. You try and use your intuition. Pick anyone around you, and do it with multiple people, so you get a range of different answers, so you can start to decipher your own intuition. And ask yourself, where is their Kundalini growth? And see if it comes in an image or a vision or words or anything else. Okay, so that's the exercise basically, and it is in Classroom. So I've taken out the chunk from this PowerPoint and uploaded it into Classroom as the exercise, and there's some instructions in there as well. All right, and so last couple of points to make, and that is if we're teaching about intuition, we always need to teach people to question their intuition, especially, that does apply to lower mind intuition and higher mind intuition. Always question the intuition, because it can have all these twists in. Especially if it's coming from the lower mind, it can be limited. If it's coming from the higher mind, there can be some metaphorical twists. But network healers and people going through self-realization, once somebody has passed the Kundalini phase of self-realization, things do change with intuition. So this is something to mention here. The self-realization process changes intuition. This is going to be the subject of the second lesson. But it's about trust. It starts to become about trust. So everything flips on its head, flips opposite. Beforehand, you have to analyze and question the intuition. After the Kundalini phase, you have to let all that go and just completely trust, blindly trust the intuition, because it's coming from your higher mind, and your higher mind knows best, whatever that intuition comes through as. So that's something in Network Healers that we try and teach, is that if you get an intuition through, say it. Quite often it's the case where you may have self-doubt, and self-doubt is normal. Everyone has self-doubt, and that disappears as you go through self-realization. But there's a period of time where it is disappearing, where it's still there. And you doubt the intuition that you're coming through, and sometimes that stops you from saying something. But it's important in this process to actually ignore the self-doubt, trust your higher mind, trust the intuition, just say it. Now, having said that, it can be easy to misunderstand what we mean by that, because we're not saying trust the accuracy of the intuition. We're saying trust in your higher mind. So that means it doesn't matter what comes out, because your higher mind is in control and your higher mind knows best. That's what we mean by the trust. It's not necessarily I trust that this intuition is accurate, is factually correct. That's not the trust. You don't need to trust in that. You need to release your attachment to saying something correct and go to trusting your higher mind, whatever comes out. that is the kind of the final the final piece to this lesson as you're going through self-realization. Trust in your higher mind, trust in the source, and trust in the plan, basically. And that's part of the journey of surrender. Okay, there we go. Any more questions or comments to make or discussion points? That's it for the lesson today. Yeah. So I think it's a very interesting topic, and I think in terms of spiritual progress for that person, it's not useful in any way really, but quite often you get people who have some ability in precognition, is what they call it, isn't it? In predicting the future, and they have a lifetime where that's what they're doing, and quite often it is part of their life plan, I think, and their higher mind is making them do that for a particular reason. And in many cases, some of them can be fairly accurate, can't they? And not in every case, but it's definitely a thing, and it definitely happens. But I think that the reason why it can happen is more to do with the infinite plan of the source. Because if you think about it, if that never happened ever in the whole history of the planet, then that concept wouldn't even be a concept at all. But the fact that it has happened now and then means that people kind of know that it's a possibility. And that is preparing the planet for what is to come. That is preparing the planet for the global awakening. And the subject of the global awakening is one of the most prophesized things in the whole history of prophecies, the coming of the global awakening. So it's really all about the global awakening. So people like Nostradamus, who predicted various little bits and pieces, not necessarily the global awakening, but that just adds to the whole bringing out this idea, and it's made mystical, and it's made sort of magical through the age of suffering, because it's sort of, is it true? Isn't it true? Does it work? Does it not work? There's all that thing going on in the whole age of suffering. But then the global awakening happens and everything changes. But it's already built a picture for people, so people will accept it when it comes. And the whole idea of the prophecy of the global awakening is part of the infinite plan of the source. It's part of the planetary cycles. So naturally, higher minds from the source through higher minds has been feeding this stuff through intuition to people throughout the ages, and it builds a picture. It builds a picture, basically, gives people hope through the age of suffering until the actual moment where the global awakening actually happens. Right. Okay. So let's. No, I got it. So let's sort of take that apart a little bit. First of all, when we're talking about consciousness or awareness, that is outside of time completely. So that is everywhere and nowhere. It's not in time at all. So that exists eternally, and that is not affected by time at all. And that's the same consciousness in me, same in you, same as everybody else, same as the universal awareness. There is just one, but it's non-physical. So yes, that's the same consciousness that existed in every single conscious being that's ever lived. However, the idea of time itself, the flow of time, is an illusion. That's how the mind perceives the change that's happening around us. So, but the change that's happening in the field, the unified field, the universe, is real. And that comes from Akasha, the Akasha flow. Akashic information manifests the physical universe, and that is, so causality is actually happening. But it's time, you could say that time itself, what is time? Well, time actually is, it is always now, but you're measuring the change in the things, you're changing your surroundings, but it's always now. So when you measure time, for example, like 1 second to the next, you're measuring now, and then all the field changes, and then you're measuring it again now. So what you've measured is the change in the field, really. So that exists. The field is constantly changing. Everything's in a state of flux constantly, always now. But the mind measures, and then it measures it now, and it now, and it now, and then it puts together this flow of time that seems to us like time flows. And that's the bit that's an illusion. Yes, the now is the only reality. Yes, yeah. But the now is constantly changing. The energy field is constantly changing, always now. But yeah, it's in the mind that the illusion is. The way we experience time is an illusion, because the mind is it's a bit like putting a movie together from loads of stills. And the stills are all existing now, but but when you put a movie together, or when you do one of these little flicky things with papers, and you draw a picture on each one of them, the mind is reading all the pictures like that and creating a flow of time, or it's flicking through that pad and seeing things move. That's what the mind does. That's the illusion bit, really. But energy and the change in energy and the acacia that's generating that is all real. Causality, one thing that leads to another, does actually exist in information. Yeah, it is. And it's complex as well. The more you delve into it, the more complex it gets. Anyone else? Yeah, sure. But don't forget, there's notes and a video and everything. But yes, do you mean the Kundalini in the exercise for the Kundalini? Yeah, okay. Yeah, so basically in Network Healers, one of the first things we do is to assess that person. So it's a bit like triage in hospital. You need to assess that person, see where they're at. Or in terms of Kundalini, it's a bit like getting a student applying for a course at a university or a school, and you need to assess where that person is exactly. It's a bit like that. Kundalini is all about spiritual evolution. Depending on where people are on that spiritual evolution journey will change on what they need best to be able to help them. So we need to assess where somebody is on their Kundalini journey. And that is what we call Kundalini growth. The growth of the Kundalini system, because Kundalini growth is directly proportional to spiritual evolution. So if somebody has a sleeping higher mind and they haven't started growing their Kundalini system, then we need to know about it. If somebody has got a Kundalini system and it's grown halfway, let's say, to the heart chakra or the solar plexus chakra, then we need to know about it. If somebody is ready for Kundalini awakening in this lifetime, we need to know about it, because they might be having a Kundalini awakening imminently. And that person would be going on a different list, because we've got different lists for different people. And if somebody is going through Kundalini, then it's a completely different kettle of fish to somebody who is not, if you see what I mean. So that's what we need to do. We need to assess somebody where their Kundalini growth is. So basically in this intuition exercise, the idea is just to find out where their Kundalini growth is exactly. So there's a number of ways you want to do it, in the same way as the other exercises. So you can do the question answer thing, see what answer you get, or try and visualize their Kundalini system in front of you. If you like doing it in a visual way, see if you can see where that Kundalini growth comes to. And your high mind will give it to you in whatever format it wants. It might give it to you in a ladder format, for example. It might give you a ladder and have somebody stood on a particular rung of the ladder. Or it might give you, that the sacral is sort of much bigger than the rest. Or it can give it to you in any sort of way, really. So basically, you just got to experiment with that. Somebody leaving. So yeah. So try that experiment out. Pick anyone that you know, or that not even that you know. Pick somebody on telly. Pick anyone just to practice and try and see where their Kundalini growth has got to. Okay, there we are. Any other questions or comments? Okay, so that's another discussion, a very interesting one. And the answer, the simple answer is yes. But it's not that simple when you dig down into it, because then we've got to talk about what the Akashic records are, what people call the Akashic records exactly, and the misinterpretations of what the Akashic records actually are. Let me start, I think, by saying that what people generally think of as the Akashic records is a field or a storehouse of information about the universe, and this is a very widely known concept, and it's been around for a long time. The word Akasha comes from Sanskrit, I think, so it's been around for a long time. The idea that there is some sort of field of information, and that's outside time, that doesn't get created or destroyed. That's always there. So an infinite field of information. So I think some of these interpretations are just got some grains of truth, but I think they're slightly off in some ways. But the idea is still kind of accurate. And basically, the way we would describe it here is that Akasha itself is the information which manifests everything, and then it gets manifested into energy, and then that energy gets absorbed back into the source. So it's like Akasha gets created, it manifests into energy, which is the whole universe of form, everything around us, and then it recedes, or it absorbs back into the source. This is, by the way, this concept is the universal trinity. So we'll talk about this in the universal trinity lesson. So it's very relevant. So, but what happens is that it's created. If you imagine Acacia as tiny little circles. Imagine it like that. And tiny little circles, like little bubbles that are growing. And that's what creation looks like. Bubbles of growing acacia, growing until they burst. And that's what manifestation is, into energy. But then afterwards, they start to dissolve back, and they get smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller until they absorb back into the source. However, so what you could say is that the thing is with the creation and the absorption is that it's infinite. So it's infinitely being created. So each little thing that happens in the universe has got infinite acacia. It's never started. There's no start to it. This is a very difficult concept, to be honest. It's difficult to imagine, but the information has infinitely been growing and growing and growing. And then when it absorbs away, it absorbs infinitely as well. So it's never created or destroyed. So in that respect, Akashic information is infinite, and it never gets created or destroyed. It's always there. So everything that happens in the whole universe, everything that we experience around us, everything that's happening does have an infinitely created root and an infinitely absorbed future, if you see what I mean. So it's always there. So that kind of corresponds to this idea of the Akashic records. But it doesn't mean that past and future all exist at the same time, because this is a popular interpretation that past, present, and future are all happening now, and they all exist at the same time. It's not technically like that, because only the present moment, what is being manifested, is happening right now. But the information that generated it and that it turns into, the creation and the absorption, that is always in existence. So there's a grain of truth there. Now that was the universal trinity in a few minutes, but we got a whole lesson on this, don't worry. But it's a fascinating topic. So an A to Z of right. I haven't really. I guess it's probably the lesson that's coming up is probably that. Yeah, definitely. All right. You can blame Sue for that one. But Sue, in answer to your question, the answer is yes. All life plans are stored, really, you could say, in Akashic information, because anything that happens dissolves or absorbs away infinitely. So the information is always actually there in one form or another. On that note, shall we call it a day for today? And next week is the last one before Christmas, and it's going to be about the energy healing research project. So it'll probably be quite a short one, and maybe we'll fit in a few practical exercises just for fun, just to catch up on a few breathing exercises or a few meditation exercises and things like that, maybe if we have time. But it'll be quite a short one, I think, next week, and there won't be an assignment for it as well. And then it'll be Christmas. Yeah, I can tell you right now if you like. Yeah. Well, so next week is the 15th. Next Monday is the 15th. We're having a lesson there, and then we haven't got a lesson on the 22nd or the 29th, and then we're back on the 5th of January. Excellent. All right. See you guys next week. Bye bye.